An injured mother horse collapsed at a stranger's door in a blizzard, but no one expected how she would return months later, or the life she would save. On a winter night, when the mountains seemed ready to swallow every living thing, a battered mother horse staggered to a lonely man's door, begging for help with the last strength she had. He opened the door to save her life, never imagining she would one day return to save his. The wind had been rising since late afternoon, creeping along the steep ridges of the Wyoming mountains the way a warning creeps into a man's bones long before he understands it. By nightfall, the storm had gathered into a white wall that erased the world beyond Cole Harrison's cabin. Snow struck the wooden siding with a steady, relentless rhythm, soft at first, then harsher, like fingertips turning into fists. Inside, the fire snapped patiently in the stone fireplace, casting a warm glow across the room, though it did little to ease the heaviness that lived inside Cole more than any winter ever had. He moved through the cabin with slow, practiced motions, checking the hearth, nudging more firewood into place, tightening the window latches one by one. The routine had once comforted him, grounding him during long winter nights, but now it only reminded him of what no longer filled the silence. The rocking chair that hadn't moved in 4 years, the coat hanging by the door that belonged to no one anymore, and the wedding photo tucked face down in a drawer because he couldn't bear to see the smile he lost. Outside, the gale intensified, dragging long breaths of snow across the cabin's shutters. Cole paused by the window, watching the storm devour the pine trees that lined the ridge. The sky had vanished behind a swirling curtain of white, and every sound, wind, branches, distant cracks in the ice, seemed to overlap into one unbroken roar. It was the kind of night no animal should be wandering in, no traveler should be caught in, and no man should be awake for unless something inside him refused to rest. Cole turned away from the window and reached for the kettle to heat water. But before he could strike a match, a faint sound slipped through the howl of the storm, a sound so out of place he froze in mid-motion. It was small, brittle, and strangely rhythmic. At first he thought it was loose metal clanging against the side of the house. Then he wondered if a tree branch had broken free. But the noise came again, clearer this time, a dragging scrape, followed by a soft, trembling whinny. Cole straightened, breath hitching. That couldn't be right. Horses didn't wander these mountains during blizzards, not unless they were lost or terrified, or both. He waited, unsure if the wind was playing tricks on him, until the sound drifted through the storm once more, unmistakable now. A heavy step, a stumble, then a pained exhale that didn't sound human at all. He set the kettle down slowly. The hairs along his arms rose as he moved toward the door, each footstep crunching lightly against the old wooden floorboards. He hesitated with his hand hovering above the latch. No one called on him, not neighbors, not hikers, not even the occasional ranger, since he'd retreated to this place. And certainly nothing with 4 legs and a cry that fragile. The storm pounded harder against the walls, urging him back, or urging him to act. Cole wasn't sure which. He pressed his ear to the door. Beyond it, he heard the snowstorm in all its fury. And beneath that, something softer, the faint, desperate shift of hooves on frozen ground. A memory flickered unbidden. His wife's mare stumbling in the ice years ago, the frantic screams, the helplessness, the silence afterward. His throat tightened. He wasn't ready to face anything that smelled of the past. But the sound came again, cracking through the wind, too close now to ignore. Cole drew a long breath, more out of old instinct than courage. He unlatched the door just an inch, and a blast of frigid air burst into the cabin, whipping sparks from the fireplace. Snow billowed inside in swirling sheets, forcing him to squint as he peered into the blinding white. At first he saw nothing but the storm. Then a shadow shifted near the porch steps, large but unsteady, swaying like it was on the edge of collapse. Cole pushed the door open wider. A horse stood there, or what remained of one. Its chestnut coat was matted with ice, ribs stark beneath the skin. Its legs trembled violently as if they could no longer decide whether to stand or give out. And beneath its neck, leaning against one of its front legs, was a small foal, barely standing, barely breathing. Another foal lay collapsed in the snow behind them, unmoving except for the faintest flick of an ear when the wind exposed it. The mother horse lifted her head toward Cole, and in her dark, exhausted eyes he saw something he had not faced in years. A plea. Wordless, instinctive, raw. A plea that pierced him deeper than the storm, deeper than the memories he had spent years burying. For a moment Cole could only stare. The storm wailed around him, flinging icy needles against his face, urging him to close the door and pretend he hadn't seen what he had. It would be safer, simpler. And wasn't that what he had chosen for years? To close the world out and live with only the ghosts he could manage? But the mare took a wavering step toward him, her knees buckling before she caught herself. The standing foal pressed closer to her side, letting out a soft, frightened bleat that twisted something deep inside Cole. He gripped the doorframe to steady himself. "Lord," he whispered, though he wasn't sure if it was a prayer or a surrender. The wind howled, but the animals didn't move away. They had come seeking something, warmth, safety, a chance, and somehow, impossibly, they believed it might exist here. Cole stood frozen, torn between fear, compassion, memory, and instinct, past and present. The mare's breath came out in ragged clouds. The smaller foal didn't move at all. And Cole realized this storm hadn't brought them to his door by accident. It had brought them to him. The chapter closes with him still standing in the open doorway, snow whipping past him, his hand trembling on the edge of the door, caught in the instant before a choice that would change everything. The snow whipped past him as Cole stood in the doorway, his hand still braced against the frame, breath tight in his chest. The storm was no gentler than moments before, yet something inside him shifted the instant the mare's knees buckled again. She caught herself with a trembling shudder, pressing her muzzle toward the cabin as if drawn by the faint warmth spilling through the crack in the door. Behind her the smaller foal made no movement at all. The other, slightly sturdier, leaned so close to its mother that its flank quivered against hers. Their shapes blurred in the storm's fury, fragile silhouettes against the blinding white, and Cole felt the choice rising inside him long before he consciously accepted it. He stepped forward, snow biting sharply against his boots, and pushed the door open wider. Warm lamplight spilled across the porch and touched the mare's chestnut coat, revealing the frost crusting along her mane. Cole could see now how deep the cold had sunk into her bones, how exhaustion bent her like a tree that had survived too many winters. She lifted her head at the sudden brightness, ears flicking weakly, but did not move away. Instead, she stood as though waiting for permission. "Come on," Cole murmured, though the words nearly stuck in his throat. His voice was hoarse from disuse, barely audible over the wind. "You're freezing out here. All of you'll die if you stay another minute." The mare blinked slowly, her breath a plume of white drifting toward him. Cole reached for the standing foal first, extending his hand cautiously. The young horse hesitated, trembling but curious, nudging his fingers with a cold, damp muzzle. Cole felt a surprising warmth bloom in his chest, something faint, fragile, yet unmistakably alive, like the echo of a memory he had buried for years. He gently guided the foal toward the doorway, holding the door steady so the wind wouldn't slam it shut. The mare tried to follow, lifting one hoof at a time, as if every movement dragged her deeper into pain. Cole stepped sideways to give her space. Snowflakes clung to his beard as he watched her gather her strength for another step, then lean into the wind that threatened to knock her down. She paused again, turning her head toward the smaller foal lying motionless in the snow. "I see it," Cole whispered. "I see them." He moved to the fallen foal, crouching in the snow. The little body was frighteningly still, its legs curled beneath it, chest rising only slightly beneath a layer of frost. Cole brushed away the snow, checking its breath, wincing when he felt how cold the foal had become. This one reminded him too much of another body he'd once held in the freezing dark, another life he couldn't save. His stomach tightened. But this wasn't then, and he wasn't going to walk away again. Carefully, he slid his arms beneath the foal's small frame. The young horse let out a faint whimper, but did not resist. Cole stood, cradling the fragile body against his chest, using his coat as a barrier against the wind. "Easy now," he murmured. "I've got you." The mare let out a low, tremulous sound, neither a whinny nor a cry, but something that carried gratitude and fear in equal measure. She stepped toward him, closer to the cabin's warmth. And Cole backed up to guide them all inside. The moment he crossed the threshold, warmth washed over him, and the foal's breath stirred faintly against his coat. He placed it on a pile of blankets near the fire, already reaching for another wool throw to wrap around it. Snow melted off his sleeves as he knelt, steam rising from the mare's frost-bitten coat as she limped into the room behind him. The sturdier foal followed close to her flank, wide-eyed and uncertain, but drawn to the safety of the firelight. Cole shut the door quickly, bolting it against the wind. The sudden silence inside was startling. Only the crackle of burning wood and the mare's labored breathing filled the space. She lowered her head toward the small foal on the blankets, nudging it gently with her muzzle. Cole stepped back, giving her room, and watched the scene unfold with a complicated mix of awe and dread. He returned to the fireplace, adjusting the wood to release a warmer glow across the floorboards. The cabin, once an empty refuge for a lonely man, now felt startlingly alive, crowded with the presence of 3 desperate lives. Cole rubbed his hands together, partly from the cold and partly from nerves he hadn't felt in years. He'd long ago abandoned anything resembling animal care, having surrendered that chapter of his life when he surrendered so much else. Yet here he was, warming a half-frozen foal in the very cabin where he'd sworn he would never bond with another living creature. Again. The mare stepped closer to the fire, lowering herself with visible effort onto the wooden floor. Her eyes drifted shut, but she kept her muzzle resting protectively near both foals. Cole knelt beside the smaller one, checking its breathing again. It was faint, far too faint, but steady enough to give him a thread of hope. He pulled the blanket more snugly around the little body and set another near the mare's flank so the added warmth could radiate outward. A gust of wind rattled the shutters. Cole's pulse jumped. The storm wasn't finished, and he knew danger often lingered behind moments that felt safe. He'd learned that lesson the hardest way imaginable, and nights like this had a way of reminding him. Insurance and safety protocols flashed in his mind, habits from years spent trying to keep people safe through rules and guidelines. But tonight wasn't about guidelines. Tonight was about instinct, mercy, and a risk he didn't hesitate to take. Cole exhaled slowly, pulling a chair closer to the fire. "You're safe," he said softly, unsure if he was speaking to the horses or to the part of himself that still trembled from the memories rushing back. The mare opened her eyes halfway, watched him for a long, steady moment, then closed them again. Cole leaned back, listening to the wind scrape across the roof. The storm outside was relentless, but within the cabin there was a flicker of something he hadn't felt in years. Purpose. A fragile, uncertain purpose, but a purpose nonetheless. He looked again at the foal lying closest to him, the faint rise and fall of its breath barely visible beneath the blanket. "Stay with me," he whispered. "Just stay with me for one night." And deep within the storm's howl, a moment of quiet settled over the cabin, as if the night itself were listening. The storm had eased only slightly, its voice shifting from a furious roar to a deep, restless murmur scraping along the cabin walls. Cole stood near the window, peering through the frost-covered glass while the fire crackled behind him. He wasn't watching the trees or the drifting snow. The world out there was still a curtain of white, but listening for something he hoped, he imagined. The faint scrape, the circular pacing, the shadows that moved with intent rather than wind. Outside, something was waiting, something hungry. The mare sensed it before he did. She lifted her head from where she lay beside her foals, ears twitching toward the door. Her breath came in sharper bursts now, not from cold, but alarm. The stronger foal pressed close to her flank, trembling, while the smaller one, still wrapped snugly in the blankets, shifted wickedly, as though reacting to her distress. Cole felt the tension thicken in the room, a pressure that hadn't existed moments before. The firelight flickered across the mare's eyes, revealing a glint of fear that tightened his own chest. He stepped toward the window again, and this time wiped a patch of glass clear with his sleeve. For several seconds all he saw was drifting snow, swirling sideways like ghostly ribbons across the yard. And then, movement, a low, dark shape slipping between the pines. Then another, and a third. Eyes reflecting pale gold when the wind angled just right. Wolves. A pack moving in a coordinated arc, guided by hunger sharpened by winter and the scent of weakened prey. Cole's breath caught. He'd seen wolves before, but never this close, never circling, never emboldened. Or emboldened in a storm. Predators sometimes used weather as cover, especially when livestock or abandoned horses were at risk. He'd read articles about it years ago, safety advisories and wildlife warnings, often tied to home insurance guidelines in rural regions. But reading about danger and standing inside of it were two entirely different things. The mare let out a soft, warning snort. Cole turned toward her, noticing the way she shifted her weight, inching toward her standing foal despite the pain in her legs. Her instincts were battling exhaustion, pushing her to protect her young even while her own strength wavered. Cole felt an unexpected resonance with that fight. He walked to the door quietly, grabbing the heavy metal bar he used to reinforce it during harsh storms. "Easy," he whispered, mostly to himself. "They can't come in unless something gives." The wolves circling grew more deliberate, their shadows weaving in and out of sight. One let out a sharp bark, answered by another farther back. They were testing, measuring the cabin, the scents, the vulnerabilities. Cole's hand tightened on the metal bar. He moved back to the foal lying on the blankets, kneeling beside it. The small creature stirred again, eyelids fluttering. Cole placed a hand lightly on its neck, feeling the faint but consistent rhythm beneath the skin. "You're stronger than you look," he murmured. "Don't give up now." The mare shifted, stretching her neck toward the little one, bumping Cole's arm gently, as if urging him not to stop. Her touch surprised him. Wild animals didn't seek reassurance from humans, yet tonight felt like exceptions were being carved into the world one by one. The wind slammed hard against the door, making everyone in the cabin jolt. The stronger foal whinnied softly, confused and frightened. Cole took a breath, steadying his pulse. The wolves were closer now. He heard their paws crunching over the snow, their panting drifting through the cracks when the wind lulled. He stepped to the hearth to throw on more wood, building the fire higher. Heat spilled across the cabin, warming the horses and giving Cole a moment to gather his thoughts. He paced once, twice, glancing at the windows. This cabin had held up against storms for years, but predators were another matter. He remembered installing reinforced latches after a bear incident the previous winter, something he'd done half-heartedly, thinking he had never really need them. Now he silently thanked the version of himself that had cared enough to prepare, a man who still clung to responsibility even when he no longer believed he had anything left to protect. A sudden thud shook the door. The mare jerked upright, nostrils flaring. Cole rushed toward the entrance, heart pounding. Something had collided with the wood, not enough to break it, but enough to warn him that the wolves were testing boundaries. "That's not happening," Cole muttered, grabbing a long-handled poker from beside the stove and bracing it under the latch. Another hit followed, this one lower, accompanied by a frustrated growl, muffled through the thick wood. The mare's breathing quickened, her muscles twitching with the instinct to position herself between the danger and her young. Cole moved back toward her, voice low. "You're safe, I swear it." The words slipped out before he realized he'd said them. The mare met his gaze, dark eyes full of exhaustion, fear, and something else. A fragile thread of trust. Cole felt the weight of that trust settle over him heavier than any storm. He had invited them inside. Now he was responsible for their safety. He checked the windows again, checked the fire, checked the foals breathing. Every few moments he listened, to the wolves, to the shifting wind, to the weakening storm. The tension stretched thin but held. The cabin groaned against the wind's pressure, but it held too. Cole sat finally, though he didn't allow himself to rest. He leaned forward in the chair, elbows on his knees, every sense alert. The mare lay watching him from across the room, her foals pressed tightly against her body, lashes fluttering, ears twitching. She stayed awake despite how badly her body begged for rest. "You're a fighter," Cole whispered to her. "Maybe tonight we both have to be." The wolves paced a while longer, but eventually the wind's voice deepened once again, calling them back into the dark. Their footsteps faded until only the storm remained. Cole didn't move until the last echo vanished. For the first time in hours, silence returned, heavy but no longer hostile. Cole exhaled slowly, gripping the arms of the chair to steady himself. The mare lowered her head, relaxing by a fraction. The foal beneath the blankets released a faint sigh. Inside the cabin, warmth prevailed against the night, and Cole realized, with a strange, quiet certainty, that this was only the beginning. The wolves' footsteps had faded into the distance, but the echo of their presence lingered like a weight pressing against the cabin walls. Cole stood for a long moment with one hand braced on the wooden door, feeling the faint tremor in his fingertips as the last vibrations of danger dispersed into the night. The fire snapped behind him, casting a warm glow across the room, revealing the way the mare slowly relaxed her tense shoulders. She lowered her head near her foals, exhaling through her nostrils in a soft, shaky breath, not quite calm, not quite safe, but alive. Inside the cabin, the storm finally seemed to exhale with them. Cole stepped away from the door, crossing back to where the smaller foal lay, bundled in blankets. The young creature's breathing still rattled faintly, but its chest rose and fell with more rhythm than before. He crouched beside it, adjusting the wool and checking the warmth with the back of his hand. A flicker of relief ran through him, small but real, like a spark in long dormant embers. The stronger foal nudged Cole's shoulder shyly, as if thanking him for the warmth spreading through the room. "Easy there," Cole murmured, offering a gentle scratch along its neck. The foal leaned in, curious and trusting despite everything it had endured. It startled him how naturally the gesture came, how instinctively he responded to the small creature's need for reassurance. He'd once been good at this, calming anxious animals, reading their fears, but that was a different life. A life he had folded away after the accident, telling himself he no longer deserved to touch the world he had once loved. The mare shifted, pulling Cole's attention. She attempted to rise, bracing her front legs carefully before her hindquarters trembled beneath her. She wasn't strong enough yet. Cole stepped to her side, using slow movements to avoid frightening her, and stuffed extra blankets beneath her body to cushion the cold floor. "Not tonight," he said softly. "You've done enough fighting for one storm." Her dark eyes flicked toward him, sharp for a moment, then softening with a strange understanding. She lowered her head beside her foals again, nudging the smaller one with a tenderness that struck Cole directly in the chest. The memory returned with clarity he didn't want, his wife's hand resting on her mare's neck, guiding it back to calm during a thunderstorm. The same soothing hush in her voice, the same steadying patience. Cole shut his eyes briefly, letting the ache rise and settle. He hadn't spoken her name out loud in years, hadn't allowed himself to feel the way she'd lived, only how she'd died. But tonight, surrounded by these trembling creatures, something inside him shifted. Maybe not forgiveness, maybe not healing, but a crack, just enough for warmth to seep through. He stood and moved to the small cabinet near the stove, rummaging for supplies. The emergency kit wasn't much. Some old bandages, antiseptic wipes, a few heat packs he'd bought years ago for winter hikes he never took. He returned to the foals and knelt again. The stronger one sniffed at the bandages curiously, while Cole worked on the mare's leg, checking for cuts or frostbite. She tolerated his touch, even leaned slightly toward him as though the pressure eased her pain. "You're tougher than you look," he whispered, "but you already know that." Outside, the wind shifted, no longer screaming but humming low and steady. Snow settled more gently against the window, blurring the world into a soft, glowing haze. For the first time all night, the storm felt distant, like a story being told behind closed curtains, no longer capable of reaching them. Cole fed the fire again, stirring the logs until flames curled high and golden across the cabin walls. Time moved strangely in the warmth. Minutes stretched and folded as Cole moved between tending the fire, checking the foals, and simply sitting close enough for the mare to feel his presence. He didn't speak often. Words felt unnecessary, but he stayed near, letting silence build something fragile between them. Trust wasn't spoken. It was offered. Breath by breath, in small, deliberate acts. When the smaller foal stirred again, Cole nearly missed it. Its ear twitched, brushing the blanket, and its tiny hoof shifted slightly toward the warmth. The mare reacted instantly, lifting her head to check on it. Cole held his breath, watching the rise and fall of its chest. The movement was faint, but it was there, more deliberate than earlier, more alive. "That's it," Cole whispered, unable to hide the relief blooming in his voice. "You're still fighting." He didn't realize how tightly he had been clenching his jaw until it relaxed. Something eased inside him, something that had been wound tight for 4 long years. For the first time, he allowed himself to imagine that saving this foal, these 2 foals, might save a part of him he thought he'd lost in the snow the night he lost her. The mare pressed her muzzle gently to his sleeve, startling him. He met her gaze. What he saw there wasn't wild fear anymore. It was recognition, a faint spark of shared survival. If she could speak, he imagined she would have said something simple, something honest. "Thank you." "Not yet. Stay with us." Cole reached up and touched her cheek, barely a brush of fingers, and she didn't pull away. The firelight wrapped around them all, man, mare, foals, as the storm outside softened further, the worst of it passing into memory. Cole returned to the chair, but didn't allow himself the comfort of sleep. He stayed awake, guarding the fragile quiet, listening to the soft breaths of the animals who now depended on him. Tonight, he realized, the world had rewritten itself. Not with grand gestures or miracles, but with a single choice, the choice to open a door, and nothing he knew would ever be the same again. Dawn crept into the cabin with a gentleness that felt almost impossible after the violence of the night before. Pale gold seeped through the frosted windows, brushing the wooden floorboards and softening the sharp edges of the room. Cole sat slumped in the chair nearest the fire, exhaustion heavy on his shoulders. But he hadn't taken his eyes off the smaller foal in hours. He didn't dare. The tiny rise and fall of its chest had become the fragile rhythm holding the cabin together. Proof that somewhere inside that weakened body a spark was still burning. The mare stirred first. She lifted her head slowly, ears rotating toward the soft hum of morning wind instead of the haunting growl that had stalked them through the night. Her legs trembled as she shifted her weight, but her breathing was noticeably steadier, deeper. She nudged her stronger foal awake, brushing her muzzle along its neck in a gesture that radiated relief and devotion. Watching her, Cole felt something warm uncoil inside him, something he hadn't felt in far too long. Hope. Quiet, cautious, but unmistakably alive. Cole rose from the chair, knees stiff from hours of sitting. He crossed to the weaker foal and knelt beside it. The blankets around its body were warm now, heated by the fire and reinforced by a heat pack Cole had reactivated twice during the night. The little horse's eyelids fluttered. Cole froze, leaning in closer. Then, there it was again, a small twitch of its muzzle, a shaky attempt to move its front leg. A soft sound escaped its throat, barely audible, but enough to break open something raw inside Cole. "You're still with us," he whispered, voice cracking as he brushed his hand along its neck. "Good, good little one." The mare responded instantly to the faint movement, raising her head and stretching her neck toward her foal with urgent tenderness. She let out a soft, raspy nicker, one Cole hadn't heard from her before, an almost melodic reassurance that made the moment feel sacred. The stronger foal trotted unsteadily to Cole's side, nudging his elbow with surprising confidence, as if inviting him to keep going, to keep believing. Cole chuckled under his breath, despite his exhaustion. "All right, I hear you," he murmured. "We're not giving up today." He fetched a small bowl of warm water, placing it within reach of the mare. She hesitated only a moment before lapping at it, her throat working slowly as she drank. Cole refilled the bowl twice, watching her strength return in small increments. A horse didn't need words to show gratitude. Their eyes did all the speaking. And when the mare looked at him now, there was no wild panic left, only weary acceptance, and something warmer beneath it, like trust, edging its way into the cold. The smaller foal's breaths steadied further. Cole adjusted the blankets, tucking them carefully around its legs, then paused as sunlight spilled across its face. The foal blinked, eyes opening halfway before drifting shut again. Cole released a shaky laugh, rubbing his palms together as relief washed through him. He hadn't realized how tightly he'd been gripping fear until that moment loosened it. He stood and stretched, joints cracking from hours of tension. The cabin felt different now, still quiet, still isolated, but the silence no longer pressed down on him like a weight. Instead, it felt shared, softened by the presence of three beings who'd brought warmth into a home that had forgotten what it felt like. Even the storm remnants outside seemed gentler. Wind brushed softly against the siding, no longer a threat, but a reminder that the worst had passed. Cole walked to the window. Snow blanketed the world in endless white. The trees stood tall beneath their frost, bowing slightly under the weight of the night's fury. Not a single wolf track disturbed the clearing. They had retreated hours ago, leaving behind only the memory of their hunger and the tension they'd carved into the dark. Cole exhaled, long and slow, letting that memory drift away on the fading storm. When he turned back to the room, he found the mare watching him, really watching him. Her eyes were clearer, now still tired, still rimmed with the pain of the night, but alive with a presence that hadn't been there before. He stepped toward her cautiously, not wanting to crowd her. She leaned forward, bumping his hand gently with her muzzle, surprising him with the softness of the gesture. "You're welcome," he whispered. The stronger foal bounded in a small, awkward circle, energized by the morning light. Cole reached out to steady it when its legs wobbled. The little horse pressed its head against his chest, and Cole laughed, a warm, startled sound he hadn't heard from himself in years. That laugh stirred memories he had locked away. He saw his wife smile in the barn doorway, saw her leaning down to cluck softly at her mare, saw the way she believed every creature, no matter how small, deserved safety. He pressed his lips together as the memory flickered painfully. But this time it didn't hollow him out. It filled him instead, wrapped around him like a familiar blanket he hadn't realized he needed. The smaller foal stirred again. Cole rushed to its side just as the little creature managed to lift its head for the first time. Its movements were weak but purposeful, brimming with the stubborn will to live. Cole steadied it, supporting its neck gently with one hand. "That's it," he whispered. "You're breathing again. You're coming back." The mare let out a soft nicker, pushing her nose toward her recovering foal until Cole carefully repositioned it closer to her reach. The blankets rustled softly, warm air rising from the spot where hope had begun to take root. Cole sat back on his heels, breath fogging faintly in the cool morning air. And then, for the first time in 4 years, he whispered something he hadn't allowed himself to say, not even alone in the dark. "I'm glad you came here." The mare closed her eyes briefly, as if acknowledging the truth he'd spoken. The stronger foal curled beside her. The smaller one settled into the blankets again. Its breathing now steady, its fight far from over, but undeniably real. The storm was gone. The danger had passed. Inside the cabin, warmth flickered across their faces, tying the 4 of them together in a bond no one had sought, but all of them desperately needed. Cole rose to stoke the fire, glancing back at the trio resting in the glow. And for the first time since tragedy had carved him apart, he felt something return. Not joy, not peace, but the gentle beginning of both. They were breathing again, and so was he. The morning quiet settled over the cabin like a fragile blanket, thin but comforting, stretching across the snow-covered world outside. Cole moved slowly through the room, careful not to disturb the mare or her foals. The smaller one slept with its nose tucked beneath its blanket, its breaths no longer rattling, but steady, gentle, almost peaceful. The stronger foal explored the space around the fireplace with clumsy curiosity, nudging at Cole's boot as if inviting him to join the game. The mare kept her gaze on both of them with a mother's vigilance, her ears flicking whenever either made a sound. Cole watched them for a moment before gathering his tools and stepping toward the stove to heat water. He hadn't felt this aware of his own movements in years, each gesture carrying purpose, each sound in the cabin carrying meaning. It reminded him of the way he used to feel in the workshop he'd once shared with his wife, hammering out horseshoes and repairing saddles, a life filled with motion and warmth before everything went cold. Steam rose from the kettle, swirling into the air with a faint whistle. Cole poured warm water into a bowl and mixed in a pinch of electrolyte supplements he kept for emergencies. Items he had collected mostly out of habit, not expecting he would ever use them again. He placed the bowl near the mare. She sniffed it cautiously, then drank with slow, grateful pulls. "You're getting stronger," Cole murmured. "Good. You're going to need it." The mare lifted her eyes to him, and for a heartbeat, Cole felt the edges of an old ache soften. She trusted him, not fully, but enough to let her guard down inside this rough cabin. That alone felt like a gift. He turned his attention to the smaller foal, checking its breathing again. It was remarkable how much life had returned in such a short window of morning. When Cole brushed his fingers along its neck, the foal twitched, then opened its eyes halfway before drifting back to sleep. He smiled, letting a quiet swell of relief warm him more deeply than the fire. He rose and walked to the window, brushing frost from the glass. The world outside glowed under a curtain of pale winter light. Snow sparkled across the clearing, untouched except for the faint impressions of the mare's collapse from the night before. The trees stood motionless beneath a sky washed clean of storm winds. It was beautiful in that solemn, expansive way the mountains always were, both inviting and isolating at once. For the first time in hours, Cole allowed himself to breathe deeply. He'd survived the night, they'd all survived the night. But as his heartbeat steadied and the comfort of the morning settled into his bones, a hollow echo from deep within the forest broke the calm, a long, low howl drifting across the clearing. Cole's breath hitched. The mare jerked her head up sharply, ears pointed toward the sound. The stronger foal pressed against her flank, confused but instinctively alarmed. Cole stepped closer to the window, narrowing his eyes as he searched the tree line. At first, nothing moved. Just the stillness of pines bowed beneath fresh snow. Then a shadow flickered between the trunks, a low, pacing shape. One wolf, maybe two. He couldn't tell yet. Cole's stomach tightened. He had hoped the predators would have moved on entirely after failing to get inside during the storm. But hunger didn't vanish with the wind, and wolves didn't forget wounded prey. They were patient creatures, driven not by malice but by survival, the same instinct that had driven the mare to his doorstep. He whispered to himself, "Not today. You're not coming back today." He backed away from the window and moved toward the door, quietly checking the latch. It held firm. He reinforced it last night with the poker and a heavy crossbar. The bolts were tight. Still, the sound of that howl vibrated through him in a way that made the cabin feel smaller than before. He went back to the mare and knelt beside her. Her breathing remained steady, though her muscles twitched with tension. She kept her eyes fixed on the door now, not in panic but in readiness, as if her body remembered too clearly the danger that had chased her through the storm. Cole rested a hand against her neck. "You don't have to run, not any more," he whispered. "You're safe here, and I mean to keep it that way." The stronger foal circled once before curling against its mother's ribs. The smaller foal lifted its head, only barely, reacting to the tension in the room. Cole gently lowered it back to rest, tucking the blanket more securely around its thin body. Another howl broke through the morning. Closer. Cole straightened, jaw tightening. He stepped into his boots and crossed to the small cabinet where he kept a few essential tools, nothing resembling weapons, but enough to make a stand if he needed to. A flare, a heavy wrench, a sturdy length of rope. He placed them on the table, each object a reminder of how unpredictably survival could turn. He forced himself to breathe slowly. There was no immediate threat. Wolves rarely attacked cabins directly. They tested, they waited, they watched. And as long as the family of horses remained inside, the wolves had no easy way in. Still, the sound stirred old memories of helplessness, memories that Cole had layered beneath years of silence. He'd once believed he could protect everyone he loved, but the world had proven otherwise. Now, faced with 3 fragile lives depending on him, he felt the pressure of that belief return, heavy and urgent. He returned to the window one more time. A faint movement caught his eye. A wolf pausing at the clearing's edge, its nose lifted as it sniffed the air. Its coat was thick and gray, blending seamlessly into the winter world around it. Cole met its gaze through the glass. The wolf's eyes were sharp, intelligent, and unblinking. After a few seconds, it turned away, padding silently back into the trees. Cole stayed at the window long after the wolf disappeared, ensuring no other shapes lingered in the shadows. When he finally stepped back, the tension in his shoulders loosened. He returned to the mare and her foals, letting the fire's warmth settle over him once more. "You're all right," he whispered to them. "We're all right." The foals dozed again. The mare lowered her head and exhaled, softly, the anxiety ebbing from her muscles. Cole sank into the chair, exhausted, but strangely anchored. The wolves were still out there. But so was morning, and for now, that was enough. The sunlight pressed gently across the cabin floor, painting long amber streaks that warmed the wood and softened the sharpness of the morning. Cole stood near the hearth, turning a half-burned log with the poker, coaxing the fire back into a steady glow. The warmth washed over the room, touching the mare's face as she rested with her foals curled close to her belly. The stronger one slept soundly, its breaths calm and deep. The smaller one, miraculously, shifted again, stretching weakly beneath its blanket before settling back into a peaceful doze. Cole let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "You're fighting," he whispered. "You're really fighting." He stepped away from the fire to grab a clean cloth and dipped it into a pot of warm water. His hands moved with instinct he thought he had lost long ago, gentle, precise, attentive. The mare watched him approach, her ears tilting forward, her gaze alert but no longer skittish. She allowed him near, even nudged his shoulder faintly as he knelt beside her smaller foal. He cleaned the foal's face and neck, brushing away bits of frost that still clung stubbornly to its coat. "You're tougher than you look," he murmured, smiling faintly. But the peace was fragile. The woods outside were still too quiet. The kind of quiet that wasn't peace at all, but waiting. Cole glanced toward the window more than once as he worked. He didn't see anything moving, but the silence pressed in on him. No birds, no shifting branches, just a heavy stillness that felt poised on the edge of something. The mare sensed it too. She lifted her head intermittently, listening in short, sharp bursts. Each time she did, Cole paused, letting the moment stretch until she settled again. Trust, even fragile, was forming between them, but instincts born from survival were still alive in her bones. Cole finished tending the foal's neck just as a faint scraping sound came from outside. His breath stilled. He moved to the window in 3 quick steps, wiping a clear patch into the frost. Snow glistened beneath the sun's early rays, and the clearing appeared empty. Too empty, as though even the shadows were holding their breath. Then a low growl rolled through the cold air. Cole's heart lurched. From the tree line, a wolf emerged, not pacing, not circling, but standing fully in the open. Its fur bristled, its posture taut. It stared directly at the cabin, ears pinned forward. A second shape materialized behind it. Then a third. They were back. Cole stepped away from the window slowly, fighting the urge to bolt the door again, even though it was already secured. His pulse beat hard in his throat. He had hoped yesterday's storm had driven the pack far into the mountains. But wolves didn't abandon prey. Easily, not when they believed weakness lingered inside these wooden walls. The mare rose onto her forelegs, testing her weight cautiously before lifting her hindquarters. Her body trembled with the effort, but she managed to stand. Instinct pushed her forward, placing herself between the door and her foals. Cole stepped toward her, palms out. "Easy," he whispered. "No one's coming inside. I won't let them." The mare flicked her ears, half believing him, half anchored in the instinct to protect what she couldn't bear to lose. Cole felt the weight of her fear like a living thing pressing against the room. It was a fear he recognized, one that had lived inside him since the night he lost his wife. the fear of failing to protect someone you love. A sudden thud against the door jolted the cabin. Cole spun toward it, heart pounding. The foals jolted awake, their hooves skittering against the floorboards. The mare lunged forward a step, unleashing a low, throaty sound, not loud but fierce enough to reveal the fire still inside her weakening frame. Cole rushed to the door, bracing a hand against it as something outside pushed, or struck, against the wood. The latch held, the crossbar held, but the sound was a warning. The wolves weren't just testing today. They were probing with purpose. He grabbed the poker again, tucking it under the handle to reinforce the frame. His breath fogged heavily in the air as he listened to the wolves pacing. The mare pawed the floor, hooves scraping nervously. Cole forced himself to breathe. He needed to stay grounded, not just for himself, but for the fragile lives depending on him. He stepped away from the door and grabbed the nearest metal container he kept for emergencies. Something meant for storing ash, but sturdy enough to make noise if needed. The wolves circled. He could hear their paws slicing through the snow, hear the low snaps of their teeth. But they didn't try to break in. Not yet. They were waiting for weakness. He opened the stove door, letting the fire flare. Heat spilled across the room, and the shadows danced along the wood walls. Cole returned to the mare and placed a hand gently against her cheek. "You're not going back out there," he whispered. "None of you are. Not today, not ever again, unless it's safe." She closed her eyes briefly, leaning into his hand in a gesture that stunned him. That moment, small, quiet, honest, felt like something unthinkable only a day before. He didn't know how or why she trusted him, but the truth wrapped around him like warmth. He needed that trust just as much as she needed sanctuary. The smaller foal stirred again, lifting its head and opening its eyes fully for the first time. Weak, unsteady, blinking into the morning light, but awake, alive. Cole's breath caught. The mare's legs trembled with relief. The stronger foal hurried to its sibling, nuzzling it with bright curiosity, nudging gently, as if encouraging it to rise. The weaker one didn't rise, not yet, but its eyes followed its sibling's movements, alert and aware. "You're really coming back," Cole whispered, awe thickening his voice. Outside, another howl sliced through the air, sharper this time, more frustrated. The wolves were aware that the cabin hadn't yielded. They were aware that their prey was still alive. But inside, life was growing stronger. Cole stood between the fire and the door, the warmth at his back and the cold threat outside. For the first time since he opened the door to the storm, he didn't feel overwhelmed. He felt present, determined, grounded. He would protect them, not just because they needed him, but because he finally understood that he needed them too. The sun had climbed higher, casting warm gold across the snow outside and filling the cabin with a glow that softened everything it touched. Cole stood near the fireplace, rubbing sleep from his eyes while the warmth eased into his bones. He hadn't rested properly in nearly 24 hours, but the sight in front of him made every lost hour worth it. The smaller foal, Willow, he found himself thinking as if the name had always belonged to her, lifted her head on her own and blinked toward the light. Her eyes, once dim and distant, now held a cautious clarity. Cole knelt beside her, sliding a careful hand along her neck. "Look at you," he murmured, awe threading through his voice. "You're waking up to the world again." The mare stepped closer, nudging Willow with her muzzle, letting out a soft rumble that carried warmth and relief. Birch, the stronger foal, bounded in a clumsy half-circle, bumping gently into Willow's back before circling again, his enthusiasm almost comedic in its innocence. Willow twitched, then tried to shift her weight, leaning into the blanket for support. She didn't stand, not yet, but she tried. "Easy," Cole whispered. "One step at a time." The mare watched him closely, then lowered her head to Willow again. Cole recognized the gesture instantly. The mare wasn't just checking her foal, she was encouraging her, urging her back to life. The tenderness of it tightened something in Cole's chest, a softness he hadn't allowed himself to feel since the night he lost his wife. The ache rose again, familiar and sharp, but this time it brought something else with it. A sense of connection, as if the memory and the moment were quietly stitching themselves together inside him. Birch nudged Willow again, more carefully this time. Willow blinked at her sibling, shifted her legs, and managed to slide her front hooves beneath her chest. Cole held his breath. Her entire body trembled from the effort, but she lifted herself a few inches off the floor before collapsing gently back onto the blankets. "That's enough," Cole said softly. "You're doing more than enough." He reached for the kettle and poured warm water into a small bowl. Birch trotted over and sniffed the steam, ears pricking forward. The mare drank carefully from her own bowl, her strength returning in measured breaths. When Cole brought the warm water to Willow, she stirred, lifting her head weakly toward the bowl. Cole tipped it slightly, and Willow's tongue flicked against the surface. "There you go," he whispered, unable to hide the smile that tugged at his mouth. "Drink. You're safe now." Safe. The word hovered in the warm air of the cabin like a fragile truth, and Cole felt its weight settle into him with unexpected gentleness. For years he had lived in a world without that feeling, closed off, guarded, surviving rather than living. But these animals, broken and exhausted from their own battles, had opened something inside him simply by needing him, by trusting him. A faint tapping sound broke through the quiet. Cole turned his head sharply. The mare's ears snapped upward. The sound came again, a distant crack in the forest. Not wolves, not claws. Something lighter, something careful, a deer maybe, or snow falling from the branches. Cole moved to the window, brushing his hand over the frosted glass. The sun's brightness reflected off the clearing, making it difficult to see anything clearly. But when Cole squinted, he saw only stillness. No predators, no circling shapes, just the quiet aftermath of a storm that had tried and failed to break them. He stepped back, relief loosening the tension in his shoulders. The mare shifted her weight beside the foals, her legs still unsteady but stronger than before. She took one halting step forward, testing herself. Cole watched with admiration as she straightened her neck, breathing deeply, reclaiming her dignity piece by piece. "You're ready," Cole murmured. "A little more rest and you'll be back on your feet for good." For the first time since he'd let them in, the thought of letting them go flickered through his mind. It was inevitable. They were wild creatures, meant for open land and endless sky. Keeping them here wasn't an option. But the idea of releasing them felt like handing away something he hadn't realized he needed until now. The mare slowly approached him. She lowered her head toward his chest, touching him with a gentleness that cut straight through the years of isolation he had built around himself. Cole placed a hand on her cheek, feeling the faint warmth beneath her coat. "You've got your life back," he said quietly, "and you're going to live it." At the sound of his voice, Willow stirred again and attempted once more to shift her weight. This time, Birch stood beside her, touching her shoulder with his own. Cole stepped back, letting the siblings draw strength from one another. Willow lifted herself halfway, legs shaking beneath her, but she held the posture longer this time. Her head rose a few inches higher. Her body steadied. "You're almost there," Cole whispered, barely able to contain the swell of pride. Inside him. Just a little more. When Willow finally settled back down, exhaustion tugging at her, Cole knew it wouldn't be long before she'd walk again. Maybe not today, maybe not even tomorrow, but soon. Her fight was unmistakable and contagious. He stood and moved to the door, unbolting it to check the outside air. Cold swept in, crisp and clean, carrying no trace of wolves. The sky stretched endlessly above him, pale blue with white clouds drifting lazily across it. The storm was truly gone. He stepped back inside, leaving the door open for a moment. The mare lifted her head toward the sunlight. Birch trotted eagerly to the threshold, peering outside with wide, curious eyes. Willow blinked, watching her brother as if committing the scene to memory. Cole closed the door gently. Not yet. They weren't ready. Not until Willow could stand beside her mother in the snow without collapsing. And he wasn't ready either. Not to say goodbye. Not so soon. He returned to the fireplace and stirred the logs again, watching sparks rise in soft orange bursts. The cabin felt less like a shelter now, and more like the heart of something delicate and extraordinary. An unlikely sanctuary born from desperation and answered by compassion. As he settled into the chair, listening to the steady breaths of the mare and her foals, Cole felt a quiet truth settle inside him. They had come to his door for a reason, and leaving when the time came would mean they were finally strong enough to return to the world that had nearly taken them. The snow had melted into soft drifts along the winding mountain pass, leaving the earth damp and dark beneath the early summer sun. 3 months had passed since the storm, the kind of months that slipped quietly through a man's life, carrying with them long days of repair work, evenings by the fire, and a growing sense of steadiness Cole hadn't known in years. The cabin felt lighter now, less like a tomb for the past, and more like a place where breath and warmth lived again. The mare and her foals had left when Willow was strong enough to walk on her own, stepping back into the world with a grace that made Cole feel both proud and achingly hollow. He thought of them often. He wondered where the trio wandered, whether Willow had grown tall and sure-footed, whether Birch still nudged her playfully as he explored the countryside. Sometimes, at dusk, Cole would step outside with a hand on his brow and scan the hills, half expecting their silhouettes to appear. They never did. And though he had prepared himself for that reality, it didn't stop the faint ache from blooming in his chest each time he turned back to the quiet of his home. Today he drove his old pickup toward the research station on the other side of the ridge, heading in to deliver some hardware replacements and check a weather monitor that had malfunctioned. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the dusty gravel road. Pine branches swayed gently overhead, filtering the light into trembling ribbons of gold. The drive was peaceful, almost meditative, until Cole rounded a bend and slammed his foot on the brake so hard the truck skidded sideways. A horse stood in the middle of the road, not just any horse. Her chestnut coat gleamed like polished copper beneath the sun, muscles full and strong beneath her frame. Her mane rippled in the wind, and her posture radiated a confidence that had not existed 3 months ago. Cole's breath left him in one stunned exhale. "Ember?" The mare lifted her head at the sound of his voice. Her eyes held that same quiet depth he remembered from the night she staggered into his cabin, but now they were clear, bright, fiercely alive. She stepped forward once, steady and deliberate, planting herself directly in front of the truck's grill. Cole swallowed hard, gripping the steering wheel. "What are you doing here?" Before he could move, Ember let out a deep, urgent whinny, short, sharp, and unmistakably intentional. Cole felt the sound vibrate all the way through him. She wasn't warning him away. She was telling him something he didn't yet understand. He reached for the gear shift, thinking to reverse and circle around her, but Ember stomped her hoof, snorting with an intensity that jolted him upright. She held her stance, unwavering. Behind her, 2 young horses emerged from the line of pines. Birch, now taller and filled out, and Willow, strong-legged and alert, her once weak frame transformed into something resilient and graceful. Cole's throat tightened. "You two, look at you." They watched him with a kind of familiarity that made the moment feel surreal. Then Ember turned her head sharply, ears pinning as she stared past Cole down the winding track he had yet to drive. A rumble shook the ground. Cole's fingers tightened around the wheel. He recognized that sound, or thought he did. He rolled down the window and leaned out, listening. The rumble deepened, echoing along the mountain pass like distant thunder. But the sky was clear, not a single cloud. The air vibrated with mechanical force, rhythmic and rising. A train. A heavy one. Cole twisted in his seat to look down the track, and froze. From the bend far below, a massive freight train barreled toward the incline, its horn blaring with frantic repetition. It was moving too fast, far too fast for this stretch of narrow tracks. Something was wrong. Very wrong. The brakes were screaming, a metal-on-metal shriek that sent shivers skittering up Cole's spine. Dear God! He looked back at Ember. The mare held her ground, refusing to let him move forward. Just 30 yards ahead, the dirt road crossed a narrow wooden bridge that arched over the tracks. A bridge Cole had to drive across to reach the research station. A bridge that the speeding freight train was seconds away from obliterating if he had kept going. If Ember hadn't stopped him, he wouldn't be here. The truth slammed into him all at once, a tidal wave of realization that knocked the breath from his lungs. She had saved him. He pushed open the truck door and stepped onto the road, boots crunching on gravel. The roar of the train grew deafening. Ember didn't flinch. She watched him with unwavering intensity, a living shield between him and certain death. Birch and willow moved to her flanks, forming a loose half-circle around him. Then the world erupted. The freight train tore through the wooden bridge in a violent crash of splintering beams and twisting metal. The rails shuddered beneath the impact as debris exploded into the air. The ground trembled so hard Cole had to brace himself on the truck to stay upright. Dust and shattered wood billowed skyward in a choking cloud. When the noise finally ebbed, replaced by the shrill hiss of damaged brakes, Ember turned her head toward Cole. Her eyes softened. Birch flicked his ears, nudging Willow to stand a little straighter. The 3 horses watched him with a calmness that made the moment feel ancient, almost sacred. Cole's vision blurred. He stepped forward, stopping only when Ember dipped her head toward him, her muzzle brushing lightly against his sleeve. Her touch was soft, so soft it unraveled something deep inside him. "You saved my life," Cole whispered. His voice cracked, "just like I saved yours." Ember's breath warmed his arm for a moment, and then she stepped back. Birch and Willow followed as she turned toward the open hills, their silhouettes stretching long in the afternoon light. Cole watched them move, proud and free, their bodies strong against the sky, their gait confident and graceful. Ember stopped at the ridge and looked back one last time. Cole lifted a trembling hand in silent acknowledgment. She held his gaze for a heartbeat that felt heavier than time itself. And then she was gone. The foals bounded after her, disappearing between the pines. Cole stood alone on the broken road as dust settled around him, heart pounding with the force of everything he had just witnessed. He turned his face toward the ruined bridge, then toward the open wilderness where the horses had vanished. "Thank you," he whispered into the wind. The breeze carried his words away, but the gratitude stayed lodged in his chest, full, undeniable, and life-changing. Dust still drifted lazily in the air as Cole stood in the middle of the mountain pass, staring at the splintered remains of the bridge that had almost become his grave. The mountain wind, warm with summer breath, swept past him in gentle currents, carrying with it the fading echo of hooves disappearing into the distance. For a long moment he didn't move. He simply let the truth settle inside him, slow, heavy, undeniable. He was alive because of them, because a mare he once carried into his home during a deadly storm had found him again, because two foals who nearly died on his cabin floor had grown strong enough to race along the ridge like guardians returning a debt older than language, because something in this world, whether instinct, memory, or something deeper, had chosen to intervene at the exact second fate tried to reclaim what it had spared. Cole exhaled a long, trembling breath and pressed a hand to the truck's hood to steady himself. Gravel crunched faintly beneath his boots as he walked to the edge of the broken bridge. He peered over cautiously. Shards of wood lay scattered like fallen matchsticks across the tracks, the freight train resting motionless farther down the line in a cloud of settling dust. The damage was catastrophic, but the timing, down to the very heartbeat, was what chilled him most. Seconds. He had been seconds away. He stepped back, running a hand through his sun-warmed hair. The breeze lifted the edges of his worn flannel shirt, carrying the scent of pine and earth, and something he hadn't felt in a long time: possibility. The world had narrowed to bone-chilling cold the night he lost Annie. But today, standing beneath an open sky, he felt it widen again, crack open in a way he never expected. "Annie," he murmured into the quiet, "you'd have loved them." He didn't know whether he spoke to the wind or the memory of the woman he had loved, but the mountains carried his words gently, as if they understood the weight behind them. Cole returned to his truck and climbed in slowly, his body still humming with adrenaline. He sat for a moment with his hands resting loosely on the steering wheel, staring at the place where Ember had blocked the road. Her hoofprints were still fresh in the dirt, 3 steady impressions where she had refused to let him pass. Behind them, lighter prints from birch and willow danced across the gravel, playful and sure. He reached out, tracing one of the hoofprints with his fingertips. The indentation seemed too ordinary to hold such extraordinary meaning. Yet there it was, a mark of life, a mark of intervention, a mark of gratitude returned tenfold. He stood and looked toward the line of pines where the horses had vanished. Shadows swayed between the trunks, and a few stray needles drifted down, catching the sunlight like slow-moving sparks. Cole imagined Ember pausing somewhere beyond his sight, turning her head one last time before leading her foals deeper into the wilderness. He imagined Birch bounding ahead, fearless and bright, while Willow moved with the grace of someone who had learned to fight her way back to her own breath. A faint smile tugged at his lips. Those horses were alive because of him, and he was alive because of them. The balance of it, raw, simple, profound, settled into him with the weight of truth. He climbed back into the truck and eased it into reverse, careful to keep a wide distance from the shattered remains of the bridge. When he turned the vehicle around and headed back toward the cabin, sunlight stretched across the road in long, shimmering beams. The air buzzed with cicadas, and somewhere far off a hawk called, a sharp, bright sound that cut through the stillness and stirred something warm in Cole's chest. As he drove, scenes from the past 3 months flickered through his mind. Ember collapsing onto his cabin floor, Birch nudging his hand in curiosity, Willow taking her first trembling breath after nearly slipping away. He remembered their warmth beside the fire. He remembered their trust. And he remembered the way the mare had touched her muzzle to his sleeve before disappearing into the trees, an unspoken promise, an acknowledgment of something shared between them that words could never define. When Cole reached the cabin, he stepped out and let his gaze drift over the clearing. The snow that once buried the land in white had given way to vibrant summer growth. Grass swayed in soft waves, and wildflowers stretched their bright petals toward the sky. The world had changed, and so had he. He walked to the porch, pausing before the old wooden door. His hand hovered for a moment before he pushed it open. Inside, the cabin felt different, not because anything had changed physically, but because its silence no longer carried the sting of emptiness. The fire pit sat cold, but he could almost see Willow cradled in blankets beside it. He could almost hear the mare's breathing and Birch's curious pacing. Cole stepped inside and let the door close behind him. A quiet peace filled the room, settling over him like a long-awaited embrace. He crossed to the table and placed a hand on its surface, grounding himself in the stillness. He had once believed that loss was a door that closed forever. But tonight, after everything he had seen, everything he had survived, he understood something new. Sometimes loss opened a different door. A quieter one, a harder one, but one that still led forward. And sometimes, if you were lucky, something unexpected walked through it. Cole stepped out onto the porch again as a breeze rustled through the trees. He glanced toward the mountains, half hoping, half knowing he wouldn't see them again, not because they didn't care, but because they belonged to a world that ran parallel to his, touching briefly before diverging again. He whispered into the wind, "I won't forget you." The breeze curled around him in a gentle sweep, warm and soft, almost like an answer. Cole leaned against the porch railing, letting the sun warm his face. The mountains stretched endlessly before him, full of quiet stories, full of wild miracles waiting to be witnessed. And somewhere out there, 3 horses moved freely under the open sky, breathing, running, living, alive, just as he was. If this story touched you even a little, just leave a simple comment below to let me know you're here. Your voice keeps these true-hearted stories alive. And if you'd like to join me for the next journey between humans and the animals who change us, make sure to subscribe so you never miss what comes next.